Most Hindus are obsessed with maintaining ritual purity, not eating certain foods or touching certain things that can defile you. What this obsession with purity and pollution has done is it's created what we now know as a caste, from the Brahmin who are at the very top to what we now refer to as the Dalit, or the untouchables at the very bottom. It's the untouchables who do all the work that nobody else wants to do. They're the ones who clean the streets, pick up the garbage, deal with the sewage, things that would defile a pious Hindu.
Dr. Sharma, the CNN program I was telling you about also related the idea of purity, that Hinduism has some sort of obsession with purity, and said that that is what leads to untouchability. And I wonder if you might answer that.
Yes, purity is an important element in the situation. In the Hindu situation in general, it may have in part, or it may have something to do with the climate of the country, because of the heat and so on. And it may also have something to do with ritual purity. Most ritual acts require that a person remain in a state of purity as understood within the tradition. The purity pollution barrier was connected with a phase in the history of Hinduism when it was very ritualistic. And that took the form of individuals becoming impure at certain times in their life, as when they are performing their ablutions, or when they have been to a cremation ground, and so on. This is temporary pollution. The curious development of permanent pollution, in which whole groups of people became burdened with lifelong pollution, which they could not shake off because they were born in that condition. This has been an unfortunate development within the tradition. Crucial to what we are discussing is the distinction between temporary pollution and permanent pollution. Now, temporary pollution is an idea with which we are all familiar. There are certain activities which we perform in isolation, or prefer to perform in isolation. Even when a couple is not getting along, one of the partners asks or shouts, "Don't touch me." And that's usually, hopefully, a temporary condition. So that's easier to understand. And what is more obnoxious, really, is this permanent kind of pollution. This has to do with the historical circumstances of the tradition in more than one way. It emerged actually as a feature of Hinduism, ironically, at the time when Buddhism became very prominent in India. And as a result of that, Buddhism and also Jainism. Buddhism, with its emphasis on right living, which looked down upon people who dealt with things involving the death of anything. And Jainism, with its emphasis on non-violence, in its most obvious sense, not killing animals. Those who did these things came to be looked down upon by society. This is one of those notorious unintended consequences. Hinduism did not have a class of untouchables, to the best of my knowledge, in the period most marked by animal sacrifices, the Vedic period. Perhaps there was just too much of it around to blame anybody in particular. When Hinduism started moving away from ritualism to a more spiritual orientation, we find evidence of doubts appearing about untouchability. But one could argue that before it could be institutionalized, this new approach, the country came under foreign rule. When the reformist tendencies of a tradition have to play second fiddle to its more existential ones, such as survival. And at that time, again ironically, this idea of pollution became a form of defense against the foreign rulers. This was one way of keeping them at bay from invading your private zone by refusing to have anything to do with them socially, having lost out politically. So this is a very complex issue, as you can see. And because it's a phenomenon which extends over a very long period of time, different factors come into play. But let me conclude by pointing out why it would be a grave error not to accord proper significance to the historical elements and to attribute untouchability to merely doctrinal elements within Hinduism. If this were so, then Hinduism should exhibit the same tendencies throughout its history and wherever it is found. But there is no evidence of untouchability in the entire Vedic period. From at least 1500 BCE to about 4th century, or maybe a little earlier, 6th century BCE. And there is no evidence of untouchability in Bali, which has been Hindu from around the beginning of the Christian era or soon thereafter. So, untouchability has been a part of Hinduism? Yes. Is untouchability an integral and indispensable part of Hinduism? Perhaps no would be the proper answer.